The desert wind carried sand and sorrow across the cracked earth of Bitter Springs, Arizona, as Joseph Blackthorne, 60, leaned against his weathered 1973 pickup truck. It was 1990, and after 38 years of searching, he had parked here, exhausted, hollowed out, and clinging to fading memories. Joseph, though his birth name was Kichirai Yaji and the boarding school had renamed him Joey, unfolded a brittle newspaper clipping with the care of a man handling a sacred text. The paper, 38 years old, was treated as if it had been printed yesterday. The headline declared, "Indian Boarding Schools, Shaping a New America." Below it, a photograph that had haunted him for nearly 4 decades. 3 young boys sitting on the stone steps of a mission church, their dark hair cropped short, their starched white shirts crisp for the camera. In the background, slightly blurred but unmistakable, stood a nun in a gray habit clutching a rosary. Joseph knew every detail of that image. The way Daniel's hands gripped his knees, the slight hunch in Michael's posture from a childhood fall, the solemn gaze in young Caleb's eyes that made him seem older than his 9 years. Those weren't their real names, of course. The boarding school had stripped away their Navajo identities along with everything else. Daniel had been born Tli-ish, meaning snake, chosen by their grandfather for the boy's quick, clever movements. Michael was Lichar-I, meaning little dog, a nod to his loyalty. Caleb was Shilikar-I, meaning joyful one, for the laughter he brought to their family. They had been Joseph's younger brothers, triplets torn from their home in Red Mesa when the Bureau of Indian Affairs arrived with their forms and false promises. Joseph took a long swig from his whiskey bottle, the burn cutting through the sharper pain of memory. He had been 16 when the authorities came for the 4 boys, using their mother's death and their father's imprisonment as pretext. Their father had fought against the seizure of their tribal lands, and their mother had died giving birth to the triplets, leaving the boys defenseless against the federal assimilation policies that swept through Navajo lands like a scourge. Wards of the state, the officials called them, as if orphanhood was a privilege. St. Anthony's Indian Boarding School had been their cage for years. Boys and girls were kept apart, meaning Joseph saw his brothers only during mandatory chapel services or evening prayers. Even then, speaking in Dine Bizad was forbidden, punished with isolation in the school's dank cellar or, worse, whippings that left scars hidden under their uniforms. The worst day, the one that still jolted him awake in cold sweats, was in 1952. The Korean War was raging, but the prejudice against native peoples burned as fiercely as ever. The school had been preparing for a press visit for weeks, a showcase of their civilizing work. Joseph remembered how they lined up the children like livestock, the youngest placed front and center because their wide-eyed fear photographed as piety. His brothers, the triplets, were chosen for the photo session because of what the nun called their striking innocence and their visible timidity, which the newspapers would spin as devotion. Reporters arrived with heavy cameras and scripted questions about gratitude and redemption, while the nuns smiled approvingly. They took dozens of photographs, including the one now resting on Joseph's lap. The next day, his brothers were gone. He noticed their absence during morning chapel when their usual spots in the boys' section were empty. By evening prayers, when they still hadn't appeared, dread took root. He confronted the guardians, pleading for answers, but they stonewalled him. When he persisted, they beat him for his defiance, locked him in the cellar for 4 days, and told him to forget he ever had brothers. But Joseph couldn't forget. At 18, he escaped, slipping away during a work detail. The school's half-hearted search ended quickly. No missing child posters, no real investigation, just the quiet assumption that another Indian boy had vanished into the American wilderness, and no one in power cared. For 38 years, Joseph had roamed the Southwest in his pickup, chasing rumors and leads, showing that newspaper photo to anyone who'd listen. He survived on odd jobs, road work, fence mending, occasional mechanic work when his hands weren't shaking from drink. Bitter Springs had been his base for the last 8 years, not because he'd found a trace of his brothers, but because he'd run out of hope. The town was fading, much like him, a fitting place to wait for the end. The whiskey bottle clinked as he drained the last of it. Joseph muttered a curse, folding the newspaper carefully and tucking it into the glove box where it lived. His hands steadied with liquor, the memories less jagged. He climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine sputtering like an old friend reluctant to wake. The general store was a short drive away, the only place in Bitter Springs that sold liquor, and Elena would be behind the counter, as always. The bell above the door jingled as Joseph entered, and Elena Martinez looked up with a warm smile. In her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair tied in a loose braid, her eyes carried a quiet understanding of hardship. "Joey," she said, her voice tinged with a faint Mexican accent. "Running low on whiskey again, I bet." He managed a tired grin. Elena was one of the few in Bitter Springs who saw him as more than a washed-up drunk. Their friendship had grown over years of small talk and shared stories. "You read my mind, Elena," he replied, heading to the back cooler for a bottle of the cheapest whiskey available. At the counter, his heart sank as he counted the crumpled bills in his pocket. Not enough to cover the cost. He'd forgotten the money spent on tires last week, and his next veteran's check wasn't due for days. Elena watched him fumble with the bills, her expression softening. "Joey, you look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks. When's the last time you had a real meal?" He shrugged, embarrassed by his poverty and the way whiskey had become his anchor. "Money's short. I'll come back when my check comes in." Elena leaned forward, her hands resting on the counter. "I've seen that newspaper you carry, seen the weight you're carrying. Come to church with me this Sunday. You look like you could use it." Joseph's instinct was to refuse. The boarding school had drilled Catholic prayers into him, but religion brought no comfort, only memories of loss. He'd also drifted from his Navajo traditions, feeling unmoored from both worlds. "Church isn't for me, Elena," he said quietly. "I don't think your God wants someone like me there." Her eyes gleamed with persistence. "Here's the deal. Come to church, sit through the whole service, and I'll buy you that whiskey. If you still think it's a waste, I'll throw in an extra bottle." The offer was hard to resist. 2 bottles of whiskey for an hour of his time seemed fair, especially with nothing else to fill his Sunday. Elena's sincerity was disarming. "Fine," he said, "but I'm doing it for the whiskey, not for God." Elena's smile widened. "Fair enough. Service starts at 10 a.m. at Sacred Heart of the Sands Parish, just down the road toward the canyon. Follow the signs with the white cross. Can you stay sober for a couple of hours?" Joseph considered asking for a sip now to calm his nerves but thought better of it. "I'll manage. See you there." Back in his pickup, he rummaged through his sparse belongings for something decent to wear. His least-worn shirt was faded but clean enough. He splashed water on his face from a jug, ran fingers through his graying hair, and drove towards Sacred Heart of the Sands Parish, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The Sacred Heart of the Sands Parish was a low, sun-bleached building with stucco walls and a simple white cross perched above the entrance. A handful of cars dotted the gravel lot, their owners, dressed in Sunday best, filing toward the doors. Joseph parked his battered pickup beside a polished station wagon, feeling the weight of his worn clothes against the contrast of the other vehicles. Elena appeared at his side as he stepped out, her smile as warm as the desert sun. "You made it, Joey," she said, looping her arm through his. "I think this might be just what you need." Inside, the church was humble but cared for, with sunlight streaming through plain stained-glass windows, casting muted colors across polished wooden pews. The air smelled of sage and candle wax, and a small altar held a modest arrangement of desert blooms. Joseph followed Elena to a pew near the back, aware of his faded shirt and the faint whiskey scent that lingered despite his efforts to clean up. He slouched into the seat, arms crossed, counting the minutes until he could claim his promised bottles. When the congregation stood for the opening hymn, Joseph rose reluctantly, mouthing words he vaguely recalled from boarding school. When they knelt, he stayed seated, ignoring the occasional side eye from nearby worshippers. The priest, a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, approached the altar. "That's Father Sullivan," Elena whispered. "He's been here a decade. Good soul." Joseph nodded absently, but his attention snagged on a group of monks standing to the side of the altar, their presence starkly out of place. "Those guys," he murmured, nudging Elena. "They don't look like the usual church crowd." Elena glanced over, her brow furrowing. "They're not from here. Those robes, dark blue, floor-length, they're different from our local brothers. Must be visitors for something special." The monks stood in a tight cluster, their faces half hidden by hoods, their postures rigid. Most striking was their appearance. Nearly all had features that marked them as native, their high cheekbones and dark eyes stirring a pang in Joseph's chest. Their stillness felt unnatural, almost eerie, like figures carved from stone rather than living men. Father Sullivan's sermon drifted over Joseph like distant thunder, words about faith enduring trials and God's unseen plans. His mind kept wandering to the monks, their presence tugging at memories of St. Anthony's, where discipline was enforced with a cold, unyielding hand. Near the end of the service, Father Sullivan's voice cut through his thoughts with an announcement. "Before we conclude, I'd like to share a special opportunity. The Brothers of St. Kilian's Order are visiting us as part of their annual pilgrimage across Arizona's parishes. They offer silent prayers for healing, and anyone seeking guidance is welcome to submit a prayer request." Elena nudged him. "You should try it, Joey. Write something down. It might help." He shook his head. "I came for the whiskey, Elena. Let's get back to the store." But as they moved toward the exit, Father Sullivan approached, recognizing Elena. "Good to see you, Elena," he said warmly, then turned to Joseph. "And who's this?" "Joey Blackthorne," Elena answered. "First time here in a while." The priest extended a hand, his grip firm but kind. "Welcome, Joey. Haven't seen you before. What brought you today?" Joseph hesitated, then found himself speaking. "Haven't been to church since I was a kid at St. Anthony's boarding school. Your sermon, it stirred something, I guess." He surprised himself with the admission, the weight of his past loosening under the priest's steady gaze. Father Sullivan's eyes softened, sensing the unspoken pain. They talked briefly, and Joseph admitted his struggle with whiskey, the endless ache of loss, though he kept the details of his missing brothers private. The priest gestured toward the monks. "The Brothers of St. Kilian live cloistered lives, dedicated to prayer and solitude. They take vows of silence and only interact with the public during these visits. You can write a prayer request, light a candle, and place it in their box. They'll pray over it at their monastery and send back a response in a few weeks, sharing what God reveals." Joseph's curiosity stirred. A prayer for his brother's whereabouts seemed like a long shot, but harmless. "So, they'll write what God tells them about my request?" "Exactly," Father Sullivan said. "Many in our congregation have found their responses profound." Elena urged him forward, and Joseph relented. He approached a small table where prayer forms and a pen waited. His hand shook as he wrote his name and a simple plea. "Please, tell me where my brothers are." Guided by a silent monk, he lit a candle, the flame flickering in the still air. He crossed himself awkwardly, the gesture rusty after decades, and approached the prayer box guarded by the monks. Up close, their native features were undeniable, stirring a mix of kinship and unease. The boarding school had forced him to reject his heritage, yet here were men like him, cloaked in Catholic robes. As he slid his folded form into the crowded box, he looked at the nearest monk and spoke softly. "If your God's real, stronger than our dying spirits, he'll tell me where my brothers are. If he does, I'll come back to church." He half smiled, hoping for a connection, but the monk's face remained impassive. Yet, as Joseph mentioned his brothers, a faint flicker crossed the monk's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. As Joseph turned to rejoin Elena, he glanced back. The monk he'd spoken to was lifting the prayer box, moving toward a side door. The man's gait was uneven, favoring his left leg, and he nearly stumbled under the box's weight. As a breeze caught his hood, it lifted briefly, revealing a jagged scar across his right cheek. Joseph froze. Michael had a scar like that, from a fall during a punishment at St. Anthony's. when he tripped running laps and gashed his face on a rock. The memory hit like a fist, sharp and undeniable. He opened his mouth to call out, but the monk disappeared through the door, which closed with a soft thud. Another monk gestured for Joseph to move along, pointing to the line forming behind him. He stumbled back to Elena and Father Sullivan, his mind reeling. "Sorry for the delay," he said, voice unsteady. "That monk," he was limping, had a scar on his cheek. It reminded me of something, someone, from a long time ago. Father Sullivan frowned, concerned. "You okay, Joey? You look shaken." Joseph took a deep breath, the weight of 38 years spilling out. "Father, I need to tell you something. I had 3 brothers, triplets, who vanished from St. Anthony's boarding school in 1952. They were taken after a press visit, and no one would tell me where they went. I've been searching ever since." The priest's eyes widened. "Taken? What happened?" "It was 1952, Joseph said, the words tumbling free. "The school was showing off for reporters, proving their assimilation program worked. My brothers were photographed for the papers. Then they were gone. I asked questions, got beaten for it, locked up. Years later I checked. The school's abandoned now, falling apart. But I've never stopped looking." Father Sullivan placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's a heavy burden, Joey. What are you seeking now? How do I let go?" Joseph asked, voice breaking. "The anger, the guilt, the drinking. It's all I've got left. How do I move on?" The priest paused, choosing his words. "Think of Job in the Bible. He lost everything but held fast to faith, even when answers didn't come. Sometimes God's timing isn't ours, but his answers arrive. Trust the prayer you just made. The brothers of St. Kilian have guided many with their responses. Maybe this is how God will speak to you." Joseph felt a flicker of hope but pressed further. "Father, who are these monks? Why are so many native? Where's their monastery?" Father Sullivan's demeanor shifted, guarded. "The order was founded by Father Benedict, who passed years ago. His daughter, Sister Benedicta, leads it now. The monks, they're a private group, living in a sanctuary for prayer and penance. No visitors, no contact, just these annual visits. Many are native because the order seeks those with deep spiritual roots." Joseph sensed evasion but didn't push. Elena broke the silence. "Time to keep my promise, Joey." They excused themselves, heading to the parking lot. The desert heat shimmered as Elena said, "Meet me at the store for your whiskey." Back at the general store, Elena handed him 2 bottles with a gentle warning. "Don't drink them all at once, okay? And maybe come back to church next week." Joseph nodded, distracted, his mind on the limping monk. As he reached his pickup, he found a flyer under the wiper. A schedule for the Brothers of St. Kilian's Arizona church tour. No monastery address, just dates and locations. Curiosity burned. If that monk was Michael, he needed to know where they lived. Back at his pickup, Joseph sipped from one of the whiskey bottles, the burn grounding him as he studied the flyer for the Brothers of St. Kilian's church tour. His mind churned with the image of the limping monk and that scar. Michael's scar. The flyer listed upcoming parish visits but no monastery address. Father Sullivan's refusal to share the location only fueled his suspicion. If that monk was Michael, Joseph couldn't wait for a prayer response. He needed answers now. Deciding to act, he started the truck and drove past Sacred Heart of the Sands Parish one last time. As he did, he spotted the monks climbing into a plain gray van, a young church volunteer loading boxes, likely the prayer requests, into the back. Throwing caution to the wind, Joseph followed, keeping a safe distance to avoid notice. The van headed north toward the rugged canyons, the road winding through sparse desert scrub and red rock formations. The landscape grew desolate, the only signs of life occasional tumbleweeds skittering across the pavement. After nearly an hour, Joseph saw a compound in the distance, surrounded by a high wire fence topped with what looked like ceremonial ribbons rather than barbed wire. A heavy gate blocked the entrance, flanked by a small guard post. He pulled off the road, parking behind a cluster of mesquite bushes, and watched as the van approached. A young Navajo man stepped out of the guard post, his posture alert, scanning the surroundings before opening the gate. From his vantage point, Joseph studied the compound. It wasn't the serene monastery he'd envisioned. The buildings were stark, institutional, more like a remote outpost than a place of worship. The fence and guarded entrance suggested control, not contemplation. As the gate closed behind the van, Joseph stayed hidden, the whiskey bottle warm in his hand. He waited nearly 40 minutes, watching for movement, but the compound remained still, the ribbons fluttering in the dry wind. Reaching into a compartment beside his seat, he pulled out a battered tin box, its edges worn from years of travel. Inside were the relics of his past. Faded school photos of solemn children in uniforms, a single candid shot of his brothers laughing together on a dormitory bench, and a small obsidian pendant on a leather cord. His father had crafted 4 identical pendants, one for each son, before they were taken. The obsidian gleamed black with flecks of silver, etched with Dain symbols. Joseph traced his birth name, Kichirayaji, carved on the back, a reminder of who he was. The final item was a crumpled sheet of paper, a St. Anthony's meal schedule, its back covered in a pencil sketch Joseph had drawn as a boy. It showed Michael tying Caleb's shoe while Daniel leaned against a wall, humming a tune. The sketch captured a rare moment of brotherhood, a defiance of the school's efforts to break their spirit. Comparing it to the monk's face, Joseph's pulse quickened. The scar, the eyes, the shape of the jaw, it was Michael, he was sure. His thoughts were interrupted by the gate creaking open. A dusty sedan rolled out, heading south. Through the gate's brief opening, Joseph glimpsed 2 monks in blue robes standing in the courtyard, one comforting the other with a hand on his shoulder. The second monk's head was bowed, his body shaking as if sobbing. A third figure, in plain clothes, approached and ushered them back inside with a firm grip. The gate slammed shut. Joseph frowned, unsettled. Why would monks in a sanctuary be crying? He wasn't drunk. One sip of whiskey wouldn't cloud his senses. The scene felt wrong, like a memory of St. Anthony's punishments cloaked in religious guise. Slipping the obsidian pendant over his neck, he stepped out of the truck and approached the gate, his boots crunching on the gravel. The Navajo guard emerged, hand on a radio clipped to his belt. "No trespassing," he said sharply. "This is private property. Turn around." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Joseph said, raising his hands. "Is this the monastery for the Brothers of St. Kilian? I need to speak with Sister Benedicta." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Sister Benedicta's office isn't here. It's in Cactus Flats, 40 miles east. Only the brothers live here." Joseph pulled the pendant from under his shirt, letting it catch the sunlight. The guard's expression softened, recognizing the Dain craftsmanship and sacred symbols. They locked eyes, 2 Navajo men sharing an unspoken understanding. "I can't help you much," the guard said quietly. "But if you want answers, find Sister Benedicta in Cactus Flats. Follow the main road east. Don't say I told you." Joseph pressed. "Are the brothers safe here? I saw them at church, mostly native men. Just now, I saw one crying inside the gate. Is this a sanctuary or something else?" The guard's face hardened, but fear flickered in his eyes. "We all have roles here. Mine's to keep quiet and protect my own. That's all you get. Leave now." Joseph thanked him and returned to his truck. The drive to Cactus Flats wound through jagged hills, the air cooling as the sun dipped low. As he entered the town, a faded sign caught his eye. "Welcome to Arroyo Seco." The name sparked a memory. 15 years ago, during his search, he'd passed through Arroyo Seco, then the town's name, and met a geologist named Marcus Begay who'd helped him after he'd nearly slipped off a cliff while chasing a lead. The kindness had stayed with him, a rare light in those dark years. In Cactus Flats, Joseph's truck was low on gas, his wallet nearly empty. Asking locals for directions, he found Sister Benedicta's office, a nondescript adobe house on a quiet street, not a church building. The same sedan from the compound was parked out front, its engine still warm. Touching the pendant for courage, he approached the door and knocked. When no answer came, he pushed gently, and the door swung open, unlocked. "Hello?" he called. stepping into a sparse living room with religious icons on the walls. "Sister Benedicta? I'm here about the monastery." Silence answered, but then he noticed dirt tracks on the floor, streaked with what looked like blood, leading down a hallway to a back door. Beyond it, stone steps descended into a dark cellar carved into the hillside. From below came a man's voice, trembling and desperate, followed by the crack of a belt and a woman's voice reciting scripture with cold fervor. "The Lord purges the sinful, cleansing their souls with discipline." Joseph's heart pounded. The cries grew sharper, punctuated by blows. Peering down, he saw candlelight flickering against stone walls and a figure in robes climbing the steps. This wasn't prayer, it was torment. He bolted back through the house, out the front door, and into his truck, his hands shaking as he drove toward the Cactus Flats police station. The station was small, smelling of dust and old paper. 2 officers looked up as Joseph burst in. "I need to report a crime," he said, breathless. "At Sister Benedicta's house. Someone's being tortured in a cellar. I heard screams, a belt hitting flesh. You need to go now." The older officer, a wiry man with a deputy's badge, squinted at him. "Slow down. Name? And what exactly are you saying?" Joseph recounted the dirt tracks, the blood, the cries, and the scripture. The officers exchanged skeptical looks. "You've been drinking," the deputy said, sniffing the air. "How much?" "1 sip, hours ago," Joseph snapped. "That's not the issue. Someone's being hurt." "You're accusing Sister Benedicta?" the younger officer said, incredulous. "She's a pillar of this community. Those monks are up in their monastery, not in some torture dungeon." "Please just check the house," Joseph urged. "It'll take 10 minutes. The deputy's face hardened. "You admit you entered her home uninvited. That's trespassing. Sister Benedicta's a saint around here. Cactus Flats, Arroyo Seco before the name change, has been peaceful since she took over the order. You're making wild claims." He pointed to a shelf with religious items, including 2 photos. "That's Father Benedict, the order's founder. Rest his soul," he said. "And that's Sister Benedicta, his daughter." Joseph's blood froze. The woman in the photo was the nun from his newspaper clipping, older now but unmistakable, standing behind his brothers in 1952. "You're on thin ice," the deputy warned. "Leave town, or I'll lock you up for false reports." Joseph left, his mind racing. The police were in Sister Benedicta's pocket. He needed help. At a gas station payphone, he pulled out an old address book and found Marcus Begay's number. The geologist had promised to repay him for saving his life years ago. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered. "Marcus, it's Joey Blackthorne. From Arroyo Seco, 15 years back. I need your help." "Joey? Hell, you're alive? Where are you?" "Cactus Flats. I think I've found my brothers. Sister Benedicta's torturing someone at her house. The local cops won't listen. They worship her." Marcus paused. "That's heavy. You sure?" "I heard it, saw it. Please, you owe me." "All right. I'm in Kayenta, not far. Meet me at the gas station on Cactus Flats main drag in 20 minutes. Marcus arrived at the gas station in a weathered Jeep, his face lined but recognizable. He stepped out, scanning Joseph with concern. "Tell me everything," he said, cutting straight to it. Joseph recounted the day. The church service, the scarred monk he believed was Michael, the guarded compound, and the horrific sounds from Sister Benedicta's cellar. "The local cops are useless," he finished. "They revere her. But I know what I heard. Someone's suffering, and it might be my brother." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "The police here won't touch a religious figure like Sister Benedicta, but we've got options. My brother, Nathan, is with the Navajo Nation Police. They have jurisdiction over tribal members and can force action. Let's call him." They used the gas station payphone. Marcus spoke quickly, explaining the situation. After a tense 10 minutes, he hung up. "Nathan's coming with a team. He says allegations involving Native victims and religious institutions demand immediate response. Meet them at Benedicta's house, but stay hidden. Let them handle it." They took Marcus's Jeep, leaving Joseph's conspicuous pickup behind. Parking behind a rocky outcrop near the adobe house, they watched the sedan still parked out front, lights glowing inside. Two figures in white robes emerged, carrying a limp man in a blue monk's habit toward the car. Even from a distance, Joseph saw blood staining the man's face and robes, his body sagging as if barely conscious. "Blood," Joseph whispered, his heart racing. The man's face was bruised, but the scar on his right cheek was unmistakable. "That's Michael." Before the figures could load him into the sedan, sirens wailed. 3 vehicles roared up, 2 Navajo Nation police trucks and an unmarked SUV. Nathan, a tall man in his 40s with a tribal police badge, stepped out, his presence commanding. Joseph and Marcus emerged from hiding, approaching cautiously. The confrontation was chaotic. Sister Benedicta appeared at the door, her face a mask of righteous fury, still recognizable from the 1952 newspaper photo despite her age. "This is church property," she declared. "You have no authority here. This man is under our spiritual care." Nathan's voice was steady. "We have reports of assault and possible abduction involving tribal members. We need to speak with this man and search the premises." Local Cactus Flats police arrived, clearly reluctant, the deputy from earlier visibly agitated. Sister Benedicta insisted the cellar was for sacramental wine storage, but Nathan's team moved to assist the injured monk. Joseph stepped closer, his breath catching. Despite the blood and decades, the face was Michael's, Lichai, his brother. Joseph called softly, using his Navajo name. The man's head lifted weakly, eyes focusing. In a hoarse whisper, breaking his vow of silence, he spoke in Dine Bizad, "Kichai Yaji, Joey." The crowd, officers, locals, and Benedicta, froze. Joseph's voice trembled. "This is my brother, missing since 1952 from St. Anthony's boarding school." Paramedics were called. Nathan's team searched the house and cellar, returning with Sister Benedicta and her 2 aides in cuffs. The nun glared at Joseph, spitting. "Your heathen spirits can't defy God's will. I was saving their souls." An officer silenced her, guiding her into a patrol car. Paramedics examined Michael, who renounced his monastic vows on the spot. "I'm done with this," he said weakly. They found whip marks across his back and arms, evidence of prolonged abuse. Nathan approached Joseph and Marcus by the ambulance. "The cellar's a nightmare," he said. "Wine for communion, yes, but also chains and bloodstains. There's a shrine mixing Catholic icons with Navajo symbols, sacred herbs, woven rugs." Benedicta forced the monks to drink wine, claiming it opened their spirits to divine visions. Michael, now stable within 4, nodded. "She targeted native monks, believing we had a special connection to the spirit world. When we couldn't produce the visions she wanted for prayer requests, she beat us. The white monks were spared." "What about Daniel and Caleb?" Joseph asked, gripping his brother's hand. "They're at the monastery," Michael said. "They learned to fake visions to avoid punishment. That's how we survived." Nathan placed a hand on Joseph's shoulder. "We're coordinating with state police to raid the monastery. We'll get your brothers." At the regional hospital, Joseph and Marcus waited in a sterile room reeking of antiseptic. Michael was in treatment, his injuries severe but not life-threatening. "A life for a life," Joseph said quietly. "You saved me back then, Marcus. Now you've helped save my brother." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's how it works, brother." A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Nathan entered with 2 men in blue robes, older, worn, but unmistakably Daniel and Caleb. They froze, then rushed toward Joseph. "Tialish," Joseph whispered to Daniel, then Shailikarai to Caleb, embracing them. Tears flowed as they used his birth name, Kichai Yaji. Joseph pulled out his sketch, the one of Michael tying Caleb's shoe while Daniel hummed. The brothers gasped, memories flooding back. "You drew this in the dormitory," Daniel said, voice thick. "By lantern light, when the guardians weren't looking." "They're treating Lichai," Joseph said. "He'll be okay." In a private room, Nathan recorded their statements. Daniel and Caleb recounted 1952. The press visit, the photos, and Father Benedict selecting them as chosen by God. "The school handed us over," Caleb said. "We were taken to the compound that night, to a cloistered order answering only to Benedict and his donors. Life there was brutal, silent prayer, daily punishments for minor errors, and forced visions fueled by wine and Navajo rituals. We wrote answers to prayer requests," Daniel explained. "Donors paid for authentic spiritual guidance, blending our traditions with Catholicism, kept the money flowing." "Why didn't anyone find you?" Joseph asked. Nathan answered. "In 1952, Native kids weren't a priority. The school falsified records, claiming you were sent to foster homes. With your parents gone, no one could challenge it." In Michael's room, the brothers reunited fully. Michael, bandaged but alert, smiled weakly. "You found us," he said. "God or our ancestors, or both, answered your prayer." Caleb, still holding to some Catholic teachings, nodded. Benedicta twisted faith into cruelty. "There's a better way, one that honors our Navajo roots." Joseph touched his pendant. "We'll find it together." As they sat, the weight of 38 years began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope. The investigation would continue, exposing the order's crimes. But for now, the Blackthorn brothers were whole again, ready to heal as a family.